What is up, home studio musicians and producers? In this video, I'm going to walk you through my home studio MIDI setup to show you how I record all my hardware synths in my studio. Coming up. Welcome back, my name is Jack. Thanks for tuning in to another video. If you're new here, it's my goal to help creative music makers make better music at home. If you're a returning viewer, you may have noticed that I have two keyboards here and a synth over here. Well, I know it's been a while since my last upload. I apologize that I missed last week. I've been trying to do a video at least every week, but I've also spent some time setting up all of my synthesizers, or most of them. I still have a couple that I need to wire in, but getting them routed and connected via MIDI, as well as audio outputs so that I can control them with my DAW, record the output, and get them straight fed back in so that I can use all of the synths and all the gear that I have. Because honestly, I just got to a point that I was tired of dragging a keyboard out, dusting it off, plugging it in, and it just was really counterintuitive to my workflow, counterintuitive to being productive and creative, and it was killing a lot of that creativity. So now everything has a place, everything has a home, everything is plugged in and ready to go with the flip of a switch, and I'm super excited to share that with you and offer some tips and some tricks on how you can get that set up for yourself. As always, if you enjoy this video, please leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what kind of video you'd like to see next, and please do hit subscribe with the bell notifications on to stay up to date on all my future uploads or if I go live and all that jazz. So without further ado, let's get into the setup, starting with the brains of the operation. All right, so here we are looking at my main audio rack, and now I did have to buy two pieces of gear to set this up aside from all the cables, and that is the MIDI Timepiece. This is the MOTU MTP AV USB, as well as the Behringer Eurorack Pro. Now, the first thing we'll talk about is the MIDI Timepiece, and this is basically a MIDI interface. It's the USB model, which is awesome. If you look them up, you probably will find the non-USB model first. I had to do a little digging to find the USB model. Now, granted, this box is from 2005 or 2006, so it is an older box, but the USB is still supported by a Mojave. They were new drivers. I didn't have really any trouble setting it up, and so far, I'm really happy with the way it works. You actually can change the routing by using the knobs on the front panel, or there's a software controller that you can use alongside your DAW to set the inputs and outputs, but I'll get into that in a moment. Now, I would say the MIDI Timepiece is comparable to the MOTU MIDI Express 128, but I did about a week of research and reading forums and user reviews, and a lot of people have complained that they've had problems with the newer one, where if you're sending system exclusive messages to synthesizers, there's a chance that it could mess up those system exclusive messages by changing some of the values, essentially damage your synthesizer or write over the information within the synthesizer. So I didn't want to mess with that, and a lot of people were still holding on to these older units saying that they worked great. So I found one in good shape and I'm happy with it so far. And then the outputs of all the synthesizers are routed to the Behringer Eurorack. You can see everything is nicely labeled. This is an 8 stereo channel mixer. So all of the stereo outputs, the left and right channel of each synth, is going into stereo inputs of the mixer, which is really nice. There's 16 balanced or unbalanced inputs on the back, and then 2 balanced outputs. And those outputs are going into my 7 and 8 inputs on my interface here, which is really nice because it confines all my synth stuff to 2 inputs on the interface and leaves the rest of the inputs open for other stuff. I actually ran out of labels. As you can see, I've used a lot of labels. All right, real quick, pro tip. This is a label maker, and it is within one of the top 5 most important things you can have in a studio. Now back to the video. So the way the MIDI Timepiece works is there are 8 inputs and 8 outputs. Those inputs can be routed to those outputs. So using the box itself and the knobs on the front panel, or the software controller that's included, I can route any of the input MIDI to an output and control any of my synths. Because it's a USB enabled MIDI interface, the inputs and outputs also show up inside of my DAW. So it's really nice because if I have those outputs routing to each of my synthesizers, not only can I control them from a synthesizer going in or MIDI controller going into the box, but I can also control them via the software outputs out of my DAW. Let's jump into Ableton and I'll show you how I have everything set up. All right, so here we are inside of Ableton, and I've got the MIDI Timepiece, the MOTU mapping software right here on the screen. And honestly, I'm super happy with this software so far. I wasn't really sure what to expect, seeing as this box is over 10, close to 15 years old, but it really does seem like they've kept it up to date and everything is working good. I haven't run into any bugs yet, but if there's some that you know of, let me know and I'd be happy to test or compare to see if we're both having the same issue. So the first thing that's really nice about this software is that I can route any of the physical inputs to the physical outputs. So right now, my MIDI controller is plugged in on port 1. I can go ahead and route that to any of my synths here. 1 is the microKORG, 2 is the bass station, Juno, D50, Virus TI, and whatnot. So here we are inside Ableton, and I've got just a MIDI track. There's nothing on it. My keyboard controller is plugged in via USB as well as the MIDI DIN. And what I'm going to do is create an external instrument device and put that on the track. And the MIDI output is going to go to the first port of MIDI Timepiece AV. My audio output is going to come from the Synth 7 and 8 on my interface. So now anything I play on my keyboard controller is routed via USB through the computer to the MOTU and out to those synth inputs. Now, the nice thing about the external instrument device is that it treats these hardware synths like a software synth, and it routes the audio input back in as well, so you don't have to use 2 tracks to set that up. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute some of those input channels on my mixer, and we'll demo what we have. So port 1, that's gonna be the microKORG. Now we'll go ahead and route it to port number 2. This is the bass station. Port number 3, this is the Juno GI. And on port number 4, we have the classic Roland D50. Port number 5, we got the awesome Virus TI2 desktop. Now let's say you want to set this up and you don't want to use Ableton at all. Like I said, you don't need to use the USB connection through the computer to use the MOTU MIDI Timepiece. It does make it a little easier to change the routing on the go, but everything is accessible and controllable on the front panel. There are a couple things in the manual that aren't there, but for the most part, those basic functions that you'll need will be accessible on the front panel. Specifically the cable routing, which is what I'm concerned about for this video. So right now, if I play my keyboard controller, it's not routing to any of my synthesizers, but I'm gonna go ahead and drag port 1 from my input port to my output port, port 1, which is the microKORG. And there you have it, it routes straight through to the microKORG. Let's go ahead and change that routing. I'm gonna go to the bass station instead. The cool thing is you can actually route one input to as many outputs as you want. So let's go ahead and hear the microKORG with the bass station at the same time. Pretty darn cool. We'll go ahead and delete those routings and I'll route my controller to port 3, which is our Juno GI. Let's hear the GI with the bass station. Pretty neat if I do say so myself. Now, one of the bigger challenges I faced was finding a physical location for all my keyboards or synths to live either on my desk or within reach so that I could have quick access to each of them. So whether you have a setup already or you're just planning one, I do recommend keeping all that in mind because that will determine how long your cables are, how you route your cables around the desk, how you keep everything organized, where you put the MIDI interface itself, as well as the mixer. So just keep that in mind. I still need to find a place for a couple of my synthesizers, but for the most part, I've got everything set up pretty good and how I like it. The nice thing about using an 8-channel interface is that I have 5 synths set up now. There's one more for sure that I'd like to have set up, and that will leave me 2 more expansion slots, if you will, for the new synthesizers or gear that I will inevitably end up purchasing. Well, friends, that's all I got for this one, but I do hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. I hope you liked the setup. If you have a similar setup or you got questions regarding any of the pieces in my setup or the general overall routing of it, please let me know in the comments. I'll get back to you and would love to talk about it further and see what you've got going for your studio. Before you go, please do hit the like button so that YouTube knows it was a good video and shows it to more viewers. And like I said, do hit subscribe if you enjoyed the video and felt you got some value out of it. Thank you again so much for watching. I do hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next upload. Peace.